All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to this presentation by DBT Path at emotionallysensitive.com. Today, we'll be talking about DBT distress tolerance skills and taking back your life from intense emotions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Holt, and I am the co-teacher here at DBT Path with Debbie. And I'm really excited to share with you a little bit about our upcoming module on distress tolerance.
And hello, everyone. I'm Debbie. I'm the founder of DBT Path at emotionallysensitive.com, celebrating our 10-year anniversary of helping people around the world cope with intense emotions and build the lives that they want. So let's get into the presentation. So welcome, everyone. Why don't we start by taking a look at some of the reasons why you might have shown up to this webinar for yourself or someone you love. So just referring to the slide here, are you feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or hopeless? Are you struggling with intense emotions, feeling like you're at the mercy of your thoughts, experiencing difficulty tolerating distressing emotions? This is what the distress tolerance module of DBT is all about and what we'll be focusing on today and in the class that starts very soon.
And here's a little bit about how DBT distress tolerance skills can change your life. First of all, they help you regain control of your emotions. Usually when people come to DBT, they feel like their emotions are controlling them rather than feeling like they can change or manage the emotions that they're having. These skills also help people cultivate a greater sense of calm and stability in their lives. And it builds resilience to handle the inevitable challenges we face in life.
Okay, so we should probably touch upon what are even DBT skills to begin with. So DBT skills are a set of emotional coping skills that were created by a doctor named Dr. Marsha Linehan. And the DBT skills program typically includes mindfulness skills, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And today we're focusing on distress tolerance. And DBT skills help to address the emotional and behavioral components of mental health. This is all having to go back to something called a skills deficit. It's one of the main reasons why someone, including myself in my past, ended up feeling like I needed to learn these particular skills. Catherine, would you please talk a little bit about what a skills deficit is and how it relates to someone coming into a DBT skills program?
Yeah, so a skills deficit in DBT is referring to the fact that if we grew up in environments that didn't help us learn how to cope with our emotions, then we simply didn't learn the skills to do so. And when DBT was first developed, it was pretty revolutionary because it was designed initially to help people who have borderline personality disorder. Now, DBT has been open to address a wide variety of conditions that at the core, the similarity is that people have difficulty with impulse control and emotion regulation. And the reason why it was so revolutionary is that borderline personality disorder in the 90s was thought of as like an incurable experience. And Marsha Linehan and her team came in and said, well, actually, that's probably not true if we help people learn the skills that they obviously didn't learn while growing up. And the primary skills are the ones that we teach in DBT, mindfulness being the ability to notice what we're feeling and thinking rather than being merged with it and treating every thought as truth and every feeling as valid, that we're learning how to simply observe our experience mindfully rather than reacting. Distress tolerance is learning how to tolerate a moment of pain rather than trying to escape from it in a behavior that might cause longer term damage to our lives. Emotion regulation is more the way of building a life that creates more smooth waves rather than tsunamis of experience of emotion. So those are really kind of like lifestyle skills of taking care of your body, finding things that bring you joy. And then interpersonal effectiveness skills are the skills of communicating in ways that don't push people away or that help us maintain the relationships that are beneficial for our lives. So DBT is backed by decades of research for everything from borderline personality disorder to addiction disorders. And like I said, at the core, though, is this idea that there is a skills deficit in coping with emotion.
Thank you so much for that overview, Catherine. You mentioned something about how DBT skills can help us to learn to not identify as the emotion that we're feeling, which I think is particularly important in the distress tolerance module, because there's a lot of focus on how emotions can feel like they're going to last forever. And when we're talking about tolerating distress, one of the most difficult things, I believe, for someone with BPD or any type of emotional sensitivity, past trauma, whatever the reason is that they're learning skills, is that we tend to go to behaviors that will help us to feel better in the moment quickly, because it feels as if that emotion is going to go on and on forever. And so it reminds me of a podcast I heard recently where we're talking about the language in English where we say, I am angry or I am sad, versus some of the Latin languages like Spanish, where it'd be more directly translated as I have sadness. And you and I were talking about how in therapy, often people are encouraged to say, I feel sad instead of I am sad. So even something that might seem trivial, just like semantics, can actually have a real impact on how we perceive our experience and how we feel we are able to cope in that moment. To think of an emotion as more of a transient experience, that if we can use distress tolerance skills, which we'll get into some in just a few moments, to cope when the emotion is really intense and feels unbearable, keeping in mind that it is a transient state, can make a world of difference.
The idea that an emotion is transient, but what we do in that moment can be long term, is really what we're trying to look at in this module, where if I can tolerate a short term emotion and remember that it's short term, I might avoid making a decision that could have long term consequences. Because often when we're in distress, when we're in a lot of pain and we don't have other tools, we make decisions. In DBT, the more people who are drawn to DBT, there can be a history of self-harm or ending relationships quickly or making impulsive decisions that then, once we feel more regulated, we regret, because there is a long-term consequence to that decision making that we made in the short-term pain. So that's really what we're trying to do in this module, is help create tools and build tools so that we can tolerate short-term emotions without making long-term problems for ourselves in those moments.
Totally. And, this whole idea of a skills deficit, we're not trying to place blame on anyone. Let's say our caregivers, a skills deficit would be like if we didn't have these particular skills modeled for us, so that we learned how to, or were validated and encouraged to sit with our emotions, process them, accept them, deal with them. Oftentimes it's because our own caregivers didn't have that modeled for them. So it's like a pattern. And so I love that our students are like the cycle breakers in a lot of cases, where they're like, okay, like I never knew this. And how many generations up never knew this, but now you have the key and you're able to embrace these skills and use them. So if you have been doing impulsive things, if you have been doing things that help to a certain degree, but then you're suffering the long-term consequences, I think it's important to remember that to have compassion for yourself, because how would you have known how to cope in effective ways that didn't have big consequences if you never learned them? And this has been your survival mechanism of coping for so long. So what DBT skills do is fill that gap and replace those behaviors that we've been using that are considered maladaptive, but that help us to a certain extent. That's why we keep doing them, but then we have consequences and it's this vicious cycle. But these skills are a replacement for those. These are things that are going to help us to stay aligned with our goals and our values and not disrupt our lives and cause chaos and crisis, when we're having intense emotions, as opposed to the behaviors we have been choosing up until learning these skills. So it really is powerful to look at that from that compassionate perspective of, I didn't know this before, and that's why I did this, and these were the consequences. And now let me see how my life is going to look different when I choose differently, now that I have some tools to choose from. So I love that about DBT.
Yeah, and you and I have heard so many times over the years students saying, "Oh my gosh, if I had only known this." "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm just learning this now." And people really feeling compelled to share what they're learning with their family, with their kids, with their friends, because once you start to learn how to manage emotions, intense experiences, it's pretty revolutionary. And it also highlights sort of our cultural deficit, skills deficit. And there's often a sense of, oh my gosh, everyone should learn this. This should be in schools. And, we hear that a lot. So um, this is also a bigger need than just for individuals too.
Yes, yes. And it actually is starting to be brought into schools. So that's really exciting. And I guess now is a good time for me to just very briefly mention part of my own story and what even caused me to create DBT Path, which is that I was experiencing this skills deficit and was introduced to dialectical behavior therapy skills in a group format. And it radically changed my life. And I remember thinking to myself exactly what you were saying, Catherine, like, oh my gosh, if I had only learned this stuff, like 10 years ago or whatever. And then just really having to have compassion again for the fact that that wasn't the way it was. And then appreciative that this existed, that no matter when it was, I found it now, better now than later, and as adults, it's interesting because we can really absorb it really quickly and understand more intellectually, like how the skills work in a psychological way, a biological way, emotional way, and that I think can help us to integrate it pretty quickly. And so I just want to give people hope if you're thinking, yeah, I never had this, that there is hope with this.
It makes me think of there's a new form of DBT called RO-DBT, radically open DBT. And the way that RO-DBT is now positioning these skills is on a spectrum from what they call over-controlled emotion to under-controlled emotion. And if people grew up and they learned to control their emotions to a degree where everything was controlled to a very rigid standard, then they have a very different set of problems than people who didn't learn to control their emotions at all. And so traditional DBT that we teach here is really for people who feel like their emotions are under control. There's not a lot of emotional control. They didn't learn how to take a breath, take a minute, tolerate distress, get help in a way that was effective. So that under control is what traditional DBT treats, and that we're looking at here. It's the set of skills to increase some control. But the other side can be problematic, but it's not because there's less impulse problem, it looks less problematic, right? So if we are over controlled emotionally, we probably are not impulsive. We're probably not making decisions that are causing as big long-term problems because things are more rigid. So, but the internal experience can be very intense still. So that's kind of the spectrum that we're looking at here, that over control to under control. And that RO-DBT treats that over control. And the emphasis is more on spontaneity, play, reading social cues. And in traditional DBT is more on self-sensing, finding your own wisdom, looking under the emotion for the deeper need, communicating with people effectively, so that sometimes I think that frame is helpful for people to understand that we're not trying to suppress emotion and go to the other side, because that is a problem in and of itself. It's to learn to be more in relationship with emotions so they're not running the show.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I'm also glad that we are becoming more and more RO-DBT informed at DBT Path, because we do have students that will come and say, I don't relate to some of this stuff because you're talking about like someone maybe having like an episode at work, an emotional episode at work, or just abruptly ending a relationship and, having lots of fights or whatever it might be. And we do ask students to share with us if they do feel like they are more on the over controlled side of where, sometimes people who have borderline personality disorder who identify as over controlled will tell us that they've been told they have quiet borderline, just as an
Right.
example. And so we do our best. We have a section on the website with some resources that we're building for people that relate to that. And Ari has been, one of our other team members, has been digging more into that training and has been developing a really strong understanding of that. So if you join the class and you're like, I don't really relate to like all of this outward expression of my intense emotions, just let us know so that we can tailor our responses and help you with the homework so that it makes more sense to your particular experience as we integrate RO-DBT more and more into the program for those who need it.
So, a little bit about what you'll actually learn in this distress tolerance module. The main focus of these skills is how to survive a crisis without making it worse. And a crisis can be an emotional one as well. So, we call these crisis survival skills. The whole idea is that we don't want to make a bad situation worse. And we want to start to learn that no emotion can last forever, even if that doesn't feel true in the moment. Just take an inventory of your life when you've had a very intense emotional experience. It probably ended at some point, even if things continued to some degree, that the really intense peak of the emotion eventually did subside. You had to sleep again, you had to go outside again. So we're really trying to update that file to understand that even if it feels like an experience won't last forever, it has to end at some point. And it also helps to stop self sabotaging behaviors in their tracks. So when we think about when we're in the moment of an emotional crisis, we tend to do things that, like Debbie said before, might have worked in the past just to get us out of the pain. But sometimes those behaviors create long term problems and can interfere with our long term desires and goals for our life. So we're really trying to help prevent that from continuing. So that's what we think of as crisis survival skills.
Yes, and crisis doesn't necessarily mean full-blown crisis, like someone might think the hospital's involved or something like that. It can be like when we're talking about not making a bad situation worse, let's say we're really stressed out at work, maybe we had a triggering interaction with a boss or a colleague, and then we just quit the job because we don't see in that moment any other way that feels like I can't take this, I can't tolerate it, I don't see any other options. We might do something like that. Could be in the context of a relationship breaking up suddenly and then having regret and realizing this was a really good partner and this was just a temporary bump or an upset or a disagreement, but our reaction is to end the relationship. It could be something like getting into an argument with a loved one, maybe a partner. You're really upset and scared, and the urge might be to say something that's really upsetting and mean, and that would make the situation worse in terms of damaging the relationship. So these skills provide a buffer. They help us to buy time, essentially, is the way that I like to describe distress tolerance skills, to calm down our nervous systems, to actually allow ourselves to come back. We talk about this a lot in the class in terms of nervous system health and brain functioning when we are triggered or when we go into crisis, and not having access to the prefrontal cortex of our brain where there is the ability to make logical decisions and choices. And this is across the board for humanity that this happens. But when we have emotional coping skills like distress tolerance skills, when we notice that we're in that space and we're starting to feel like we're losing control, or that we're going to say something that could really, really damage a relationship, or we're going to make a decision that could, have really huge consequences, and we feel compelled to do it because that's been our pattern. These skills help us to take a step back, so that we can allow for all of the activation that is happening in our bodies at that time, which is a lot in our nervous systems. It will cut off that ability to think clearly. These skills help us to buy time to allow for the nervous system to calm down, to get out of fight, flight, freeze, so that we can regain access to that part of our brain that allows us to think logically, that allows us to make a decision or to choose our next words that'll come out of our mouths to our boss or to our friend or to our parent or to our partner from a place that is informed by both our emotions and our rational, logical mind, which is something that we talk about in DBT skills. So these skills can be applied when it's a huge crisis, like emergency situation, but they can also be applied in these situations that can turn into full-blown crises by catching them, by stopping them in their tracks using these skills. The more you accumulate those positive experiences, I believe the easier it becomes, because you're like, okay, like I do not want to go down that road. Or like, I'm so ticked off right now, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to use my skills. And we see our lives change because we're doing something different and having different outcomes. So it's really, really powerful.
Right. And the research on people who are emotionally sensitive, more specifically have borderline personality disorder, is that when we use this idea of a window of tolerance, that we can tolerate a certain amount of emotional sensation before we go into what's called hyper arousal, which is when we start to feel like we're in a crisis. That's when we're in the fight flight, the upper tier. And then if we go below our window, it's called hypoarousal. And it's that more dissociated, depressed, apathetic state. But when we're in that upper hyper arousal is when we feel like we're in a crisis. And people who have borderline personality disorder, the data shows that they stay there longer. The brain stays hyper aroused longer. And the problem with that is that there's more time to make decisions. So DBT really focuses on that a lot, that everyone goes to those states. No one doesn't get overwhelmed sometimes. Everyone experiences fight flight. Every human being in a body goes there, but certain brains stay there longer. So that's what we're trying to also shift, is to insert tools that help people come back down faster. So there's less time spent in that crisis feeling, and so that we're back in our window, the place where we can make decisions that make more sense for what we actually want long term. So sometimes I think that's helpful. Is like, it's not that we won't go there, it's that we are trying to come back a little bit faster. And one of the ways that does help us come back is increasing our mindfulness of our breath and body sensations. So mindfulness is really a core idea of DBT. It is central. One of the founding ideas of DBT is mindfulness. That's where Zen Buddhism, a spiritual aspect of this psychology, is found. And we practice in DBT Path mindfulness at the start of every class. Every week you'll get we call them midweek materials, but they're practices from me and Debbie and others that help support the increase of mindfulness skills. And I teach a monthly Wise Mind workshop to do this as well. But the reason we include mindfulness of breath and body sensations is so that when we're in that hyperarousal state, we can become aware that we're there, and we start to track the sensations of that experience. We notice our breath, and paradoxically, that starts to help us come back down into a more tolerable state. It's one of those paradoxes of change ideas, is that once we're more aware and accepting, things start to change. Being able to tolerate even intense sensation, things start to change on their own. So mindfulness is really key. I saw a meme recently that someone was saying that I'm so sleep deprived. I would do anything to get enough sleep. Anything in the world, I would do anything. And then the next part was, except go to bed on time. And mindfulness is a little bit like that. We sort of plead with people, just take a minute, 2 minutes a day. And that in and of itself starts to really change things. But it tends to be one of the harder things that we do in class, because it's calming, because it looks less maybe overt. It's kind of a different a different thing than we might be used to. But we do really emphasize that in our class.
Thank you, Catherine. Would you talk a little bit more about why mindfulness practices that may, even if it's just for a moment or two of sitting, maybe being quiet, listen, some of the things we do are listen to the sounds in our environment or notice sensations in our bodies. Why is this so difficult for some people, or they may feel a resistance to it? And would you talk a little bit about your one drop method suggestion that you often suggest for people that are experiencing this discomfort with mindfulness?
Well, we experience discomfort with mindfulness for a lot of reasons, but most of what we talk about at DBT Path is through the lens of somatic and trauma psychology, which is that if we are highly in that hyper arousal state, that highly activated state, then we can experience literal tunnel vision. It's like our peripheral vision narrows in because we're in a survival state. Our bodies think we're in danger, and so all of our senses are activated to focus on the problem and to get out of it. And that would be great if we were being chased by a lion, right? That would be awesome. Like, get going. But if it's because someone sent us a text message that hurt our feelings, then that's not the best response, right? If our response is for getting a text message that didn't feel good is to act like we're in a crisis and respond immediately or do something damaging to ourselves or somebody else, then that tunnel vision fight flight response is something we probably need to work on. So the mindfulness part is that we often do mindfulness that is more sensory based, and one of the reasons for that is that it helps us shift our peripheral vision. It literally helps us go from tunnel vision. I mean, people will say, I feel I can only see what's in front of me. It's like a blackout. And that's what the nervous system will do. So one thing is that we start to open our peripheral vision and simply look around. Like, is there a threat? And we start to try to scan for safety of what's actually here. Where am I? It's like we update the file around danger and safety. The other part about feeling the body is that it helps us shift from the story we're having about what's happening back into our physical sensations. So I bet we've all had the experience that if we get a text message we didn't like and it hurt our feelings, then it's sort of like a tornado of thought, right? Like, and this is why I didn't do this, and this is what this part meant, and it's kind of like we can make up a narrative that might or might not be totally true. So we work with people on text messages a lot because it's a new form of communication that we often don't know tone. We infer a lot of tone and we make up all these stories about it. Again, sometimes true, sometimes not. But the idea of noticing body sensations is it helps us shift from that tornado of a story that can lead to more impulsive decision making to noticing the impact. Oh, my chest got so hot and tight. My stomach dropped, whatever the sensation is, so that we can start to take care of ourselves first and make a wiser next step from our deeper intuition, not just that impulse that is survival based or emotionally based, but our deep sense of self is helping navigate the inevitable challenges that we face every day.
A lot of times, like when I first started learning the mindfulness skills, I didn't get what the purpose was. First of all, I could barely sit still, and it was very anxiety provoking to sit there and try to be with myself. So I love that you sometimes suggest like one drop, like just doing it. If you have to start doing it for 30 seconds at a time, we don't expect people to be sitting there for like an hour doing a mindfulness practice. But the reason I like that you brought up an example with the texting is that the reason why we do the mindfulness skills, why we practice them together and learn to get comfortable with them over time, is because we are going to apply the experiences that we have in the more formal mindfulness practices out in the world when things happen. These skills help us to slow down, help us to notice our experience, like you're saying, both internally and externally. So we take an inventory instead of, when we get emotionally triggered, we get flooded. And we might have all these thoughts, like you said, that may or may not be true. We may have these really intense emotions that feel really scary, that make it really uncomfortable to be in our bodies, which may then catapult us into impulsive behaviors to not have to feel that. And these skills help us to slow down, notice what's happening, take inventory, check the facts of the situation, and make a decision from a more informed, wiser place, like you're saying. So mindfulness skills, huge. It's not up here, but we also have a somatics workshop with Serena twice a month.
My name is Serena Lucchese, and welcome to Somatics with Serena.
Here at DBT Path, where we practice micro movements and gentle exercises that are designed to help release trauma that's stored in our biology. And we get more into that. If you join our class, there's a whole video that Serena and I did that explains like how that is possible and how that works and what we do. And it also mentions up here your Wise Mind workshop that you do monthly at DBT Path, Catherine, for students and graduates of the program have access to that benefit as well. How do we use mindfulness? How do we embrace our wise mind in that particular workshop that you guide us in?
Well, wise mind in DBT is distinguished from, we think of wise mind as our deep intuitive center that's different from what we call emotion mind or rational mind. And in the wise mind workshop, we're trying to make space to learn how to distinguish the difference. So oftentimes when people start DBT, they are just trying to understand, like, is what I'm thinking or feeling here rational mind, or is it wise mind? If we've been in a lot of emotion mind, that tends to be fairly easy to identify. That hyper arousal is kind of familiar, but that deep intuitive center compared to rational mind sometimes is harder to distinguish. And so in our workshop, we're really trying to let it be kind of fun and interesting to learn how to sense wise mind and listen to what it sounds like, so that we have, a compass, a barometer for when we're highly emotional, maybe in distress, and we're trying to access our intuition, that wise mind place. We know what it sounds like when we hear it. And the reason I'm pretty passionate about that is that no one can tell you that what it sounds like. The only way we know is by having an experience of it ourselves. And even as a therapist, I think that it sometimes is a little bit rare that people are really taught tools to access wise mind. And for me, I think movement, we use journaling and movement, but practices that are really engaging and something that you wouldn't necessarily usually find in a DBT class, to try to get that experience so that people walk away really understanding what their wise mind sounds like. And there is an idea that we use a lot called titration. And this is the one drop idea that Debbie was mentioning. The one drop idea is from somatic psychology and trauma psychology as well. And it's referring to this idea of titration, that we want to practice tolerating distress in tiny bits rather than sitting in a still meditation posture and then having all of our emotion come up and then just tolerating that. That's not what we're looking for. We're really learning how to have like small, tolerable experiences of emotion so that we can learn to smoothly let the nervous system expand that capacity. So that window, by little drops of tolerating distress, we try to open that window of tolerance so that if we feel angry, we can feel angry and tolerate that emotion without it popping us into a fight flight response. And we can tolerate sadness, drops of sadness, drops of emotion at a time. And we can breathe into it and stay within our window of tolerance. And again, not going into crisis. So, when we talk about regulation and the idea of a window of tolerance, it's not to be calm and unemotional. It's so that we can have a full range of emotional experience, which is the human experience, without it kicking us into a fight flight response that we're trying to get out of. The big reason for that is that if we feel angry about something, it's a signal that a boundary has been crossed or a need of ours isn't met. And we want to be able to listen to that and to know if it means I need to act or not. If I feel angry and I get dysregulated, I go into that fight flight, then I'm probably going to act on it. I'm going to flee or fight. And that might not be the wisest choice. I might need to say, I'm angry. I need to work this out for a minute, think it through, feel what my anger is telling me, and then decide how I want to respond. But it doesn't mean we're shutting down emotion. It means that we're trying to be more mindful and effective with the emotions we do experience.
I love that you shared that, because there is wisdom, and emotions are intelligent, and there's a kernel of wisdom, is what we say in DBT skills, in every emotion, whether or not they fit the facts of the moment, whether or not they are like a trauma response. So we don't want to shut down our emotions. They still have important information to give us. But like you're saying, one experience that I have had with the titrating and using the one drop is, for a long time, I was afraid to feel sadness, because I had clinical depression at one time. So I was just really afraid that allowing myself to feel sadness meant I would spiral into like this deep depression that like I couldn't get out of. So allowing myself to experience little drops of sadness was just like amazing. It felt safe to be able to feel that and then step away and realize it wasn't going to lead to a full-blown spiral. I had the same thing with anger, having grown up in a environment where anger was a very scary thing if someone experienced it. So for most of my life, I was unable to express anger, and I was afraid to feel it because I thought, well, then I'm going to be a monster like someone else, and so that was also really, really healing and transforming, was to be able to experience little bits of anger. And anger has its place, like you're saying. Like there are things we accomplish in this life to protect ourselves and the ones we love and the things that we value, because we allow ourselves to feel anger and then take action from a place of, our wise mind that we're talking about. So yeah, this work can be incredibly beneficial to just, when we do these mindfulness practices, if you feel uncomfortable, if it feels like a lot, we just take you right back to what Catherine's saying of just one drop at a time, and then you build it. Like for myself, I can feel sadness without going into a panic attack that it means it's the end of the world, I'm going to end up in the hospital. That's what it was like at the beginning. And I had to do one drop of sadness at a time. Now I can feel sadness and know that I'm safe and that it's a normal emotion, a normal response. So maybe this is resonating with someone right now. Okay, and finally on this slide, we talk a lot about grounding and self-soothing techniques. It says here, learn how to cope when dissociation strikes and learn how to feel safe being your own rescuer. So dissociation, I've experienced a lot of it in my life, and it's when our nervous systems become so overwhelmed by stress that we feel cut off. So we might feel numb, we might feel checked out, we might feel spaced out, things might not feel quite real. Sometimes you hear about derealization, where the world doesn't feel quite real, like you're in a dream or a movie. Or depersonalization sometimes happens to people where they look in the mirror and they're like, they don't feel like they're themselves, or their arm isn't their arm. Like these are extreme nervous system anxiety reactions to stress, often tied back to trauma. And so when we dissociate, sometimes we lose time. We may not remember what happened for a little bit of time, or we may not, someone may be speaking to us and we realize we haven't heard anything they've said. People naturally dissociate in a way that's not pathological. Like sometimes we just space out or we daydream or whatever, but this is more along the lines of like when it becomes disruptive to our lives and our relationships. And I had a lot of that personally, and the grounding and self-soothing techniques really helped me to feel more safe in my body, along with somatics, which is why we have integrated that into this program and have opportunities for that. I think we've talked about what we feel are sometimes the missing links and keys. And I just looking at my own journey, I was like, I need to offer this because I know that it was such an important part of combining the DBT skills with an understanding of somatic, soma meaning the body, and learning how to ground, learning how to be present. So combined, it's really complementary, the somatic body skills with the mindfulness skills. So there's that piece. And then as far as grounding and self-soothing, this is one of the biggest areas for a lot of people, it was for me, where the skills deficit has a lot of impact. If we never learned how to ground and calm ourselves, if we never received validation when we tried to do that as children, and if we, like, I'll speak for myself, for many, many years into adulthood, I felt that I needed someone else to help me when I was in crisis, whether that was my therapist or psychiatrist, like going to the mental health clinic or going to, into crisis, going to the emergency room, whether it was my partner at the time, whether it was friends. I didn't feel equipped because I never learned how to ground and soothe myself. So it always felt like it never occurred to me that I could develop that internally. It was always, I needed someone else to do that. And it's not that once we learn these skills that we don't seek out the comfort from another person. Of course we will. That's human nature, and that's connection, and that's relationship and interconnectedness. But there's something very, very empowering about learning how, when an intense emotion strikes and when your stuff comes up, learning how to work through that yourself, to take a few minutes to take care of yourself and use some of the grounding and self-soothing techniques that we teach in this course to get yourself to a place where you feel calmer, where you feel more balanced. And then maybe you can go and ask to have a conversation with someone else that cares about you and that will be supportive. There's something very, I can't even place my mind on the exact word that I'm looking for, but it's about, feeling like, okay, like I did this, what I mean? Like I was able to bring myself to a place where I feel safe again, without having to go to the ER, without having to dial my therapist. Not saying that we don't want to ever do those things if we really need them, but just learning that sometimes I can just totally take care of myself. Like now I know how. Okay, so now that you know a little bit about what DBT skills are, what they're used for, some of the things that we'll be covering in the course that's coming up very soon, you're probably wondering what DBT path is like. And we have a weekly class. It's online on Mondays at 4 p.m. Pacific. And there's a pre-class chat at 3:30 p.m. that's optional. And it's basically the type in chat where students from around the world, as well as team members, can catch up on the week and talk about skills use, as well as just getting to know each other a little bit more personally, if that's something that appeals to you. And the class itself is recorded in case you can't make it at that particular time. We have a number of students who are in Europe, so because of the time zone, they prefer to watch the class at another time. So the recordings are there for that. Some people work or have school during that time. So for any reason, just know that you have access to watch it at your convenience if you can't make it to the live class. The other thing about the class itself, a lot of people are relieved to find that you do not have to turn your camera on during class. This provides a level of anonymity and privacy, which a lot of our students have appreciated, especially students who are more public figures, celebrities, and as well as just everyday people who just feel a little bit more at ease not having to turn on their cameras. So that's why we do not require them during the class itself. So just really streamline getting the lesson. You have a study sheet that's accompanying it. That's a fill-in study sheet that if that's something that helps you with keeping track and following along, we have that resource as well. And just really, really focused on delivering to you as much quality skills information as we can each week during that time frame.
So in addition to our weekly live class, we have what's called our study hall forum. And it's the place where you'll find all the information about the class, but it's also where you will post your homework if you want to share it to get feedback with team members. If you want to ask a question, we have a question thread that myself and other team members respond to. And it's where you'll find your midweek materials, which are those weekly coping skills that you get sent in the middle of the week just to help keep you connected to the content rather than kind of feeling disconnected midweek until the class comes around again on Monday. It's also where we have a weekend thread. Sometimes people need a little extra support over the weekend when maybe school and work isn't happening and there's less structure. So the weekend thread is another one of those places of continuity where you can get support, share, and there's prompts to reply to. The study hall forum is encrypted, so you can feel comfortable with your data being protected, and we don't use social media. And one of the reasons is so that people feel comfortable with sharing what you need to, being open with your homework if you want feedback.
So in addition to weekly class, midweek materials, and other happenings in the study hall forums, we have optional bonuses over Zoom each month that allow for, yes, you can turn your cam on if you want more of that intimacy, if you want to see and interact and see body language and hear voices of your fellow students and team members. This is an opportunity for students who are needing that to have that as well. And at the time of this recording, as it says, bonus offerings is subject to change. However, the ones that we're currently offering have been offered for quite a while now. At the time of this recording, we're offering something called DBT and T once a month, Wise Mind Workshop once a month, and Somatics with Serena twice a month. And Catherine spoke a little bit about Wise Mind Workshop. And would you just give us a quick idea about what they can expect at DBT and T, Catherine?
Yeah, so the DBT and T came about to have a place for people to feel more connection in the class, since the class is more of a presentation. It's, people are just sort of watching. So the DBT and T is more engagement with other students and myself. So if you want to participate, you send a question, you'll get notification that the workshop is coming up, and you submit a question. And I usually get to all questions submitted, and I share my thoughts, and we open it up for discussion too, if that's wanted. People always have the choice to not have other people comment on their question and just receive feedback from me. But sometimes people ask questions that really are best answered by other students. So it's a chance for us to talk and share a little bit more, and also get into concept a little bit more deeply, rather than just through typing or through the study hall forum.
Yes, and I briefly mentioned Somatics with Serena. That's a 90-minute workshop twice a month that is really experiential, with doing, like I said earlier, these gentle micro movements to release stress from the body, release trauma from the body. Super, super fascinating. Serena often gets into the science of it, and most of the time myself and the students who attend are incredibly relaxed afterwards. So please, if you do join us, at least check this out once to see if it feels good to you, and feel free to join these every month when we have them. When you complete the program, you're considered a graduate or a senior student. And as it says up here, you retain some benefits and you continue to be a part of our community indefinitely, as long as you would like to be. So you don't lose that sense of connection and community and support. So some of the things that you can expect as a graduate is you'll be invited to a grads only ceremony that Catherine facilitates, and that's really beautiful and unique. And you'll also retain access to our bonus workshops. So we were just talking about DBT and T, Wise Mind Workshop, Somatics with Serena. So after you graduate from the class and you're no longer attending the DBT skills weekly classes, you can still come to those workshops every month as much as you would like, and there's no additional charge for that. And you'll receive a certificate of completion to honor your personal achievement. And we do really, really love to celebrate this with you.
Yeah, it's really nice. It tends to be really intimate, and we get to hear what it's like for people to go from the beginning. The deciding to join DBT path tends to be a pretty big decision all the way through the 9 months. And I mean, Debbie, I'm always just like heart open, touched by people's experiences. It's always really, really special to gather in an intimate group for that ceremony. It's one of my favorite parts, is just having space for people to reflect and then share their experiences through the whole process.
Same here. And speaking of which, before we wrap up, we do have some testimonials from actual DBT Path students. You can also find these on our website. We'd like to just take a few moments with you and have you hear from some students and what their experiences have been like. So we'll go ahead and do that now.
Hey folks, I'm Christopher, and I just thought I'd take a few moments to really talk a little bit about my experience with Debbie and her staff at DBT Path and emotionallysensitive.com, and also just to give you a little idea of what I got out of doing just one module, the emotion regulation module for the past few months. First of all, in terms of Debbie and her team, outstanding, fantastic, second to none with their professionalism, knowledge, compassion, kindness, and care. Unbelievable, second to none. And I looked around, believe me. Speaking of that, my second reason is just to say a little bit about what I got out of it. And my wife, Pam, has been an integral part of this course with me. She's been there by my side the whole time. And she was the one who actually pointed out to me that maybe something like DBT would work for me. A couple months ago, I was going through another rough patch, I say, because my whole life I've been going through rough patches. And I finally feel as if I have some answers, some skills, some strategies to help me through those emotional storms that I've gone through. And they're lessening now, and I contribute that to DBT. DBT has impacted my communication, my relationships, my career, and it has given me some resilience. And I remain kind to others and to myself through the strategies of this course. It's just phenomenal. It's been only one module. I look forward to continuing with the full complete program, and I hope to see you all in that class. So until then, peace out and see you around.
That's awesome.
My heart. And he's just doing so well and making so much progress. Okay.
So finding DBT Path and emotionallysensitive.com has been one of the best things that has probably ever happened to me in my life. I've been in and out of therapy for 10 years, but I was taking some time away with family to deal with some really bad stuff that I was going through lately. And I was really looking for an online DBT course that was available to me. My sister found emotionallysensitive.com. And it's been about 10 or 11 weeks now, and it's honestly one of the best investments I've ever made. I feel more in control of my mood and my life. I journal all day, and when I'm in a bad mood, I'm aware of it before it reaches the kind of boiling point. And the teachers in the community have been so helpful. If you have a question or you're curious how to deal with a certain situation, I honestly could not recommend this class more to people. It has been such a worthwhile investment and just absolutely amazing for my life and finding joy, doing art again, and kind of finding things that make life feel meaningful and manageable and pleasant even. So it has been absolutely wonderful, and I can't recommend it to enough people.
Oh, I love that. I love that testimonial because of the emphasis on life feeling good, making art, and we talk so much about tolerating distress and getting through hard moments, but the point is so that life is meaningful.
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't help but get misty-eyed. I didn't think I would because I've heard her testimonial before, but just witnessing people taking back their lives, and reclaiming joy. It's just beautiful.
And I just wanted to give a shout out to DBT Path. I have been in that program for a couple months now, just now completing my first module, and I must say, it has been a life-changing experience for me. The skills that Debbie teaches along with her team have been so valuable to me. I've gone from literally not being able to get out of bed to showing up for work every day, to increasing the love and care and communication in my relationships, to being more assertive in conversations I have, and being more mindful of what I'm feeling and experiencing. The skills have just been so valuable to me, and I'm learning every day how to apply them. It is one of those things that it does take work, and I'm glad that I decided to commit to something that I knew if I committed to would change my life. And just after a couple of months, I'm seeing radical changes in my happiness and my well-being and my health, and so much more. So if you're even thinking about possibly getting involved in taking a module, I would really encourage that. I think you are totally worth the investment. You may not think so at the beginning, like I didn't think I was worth it, but now I know, and I have a stronger sense of self because of this course, and I would highly recommend it to anybody interested in improving their overall well-being, their purpose in life, and just their feelings that they can handle the day-to-day of this life. So
My heart, Catherine.
Everyone. Wow. Yes. So amazing.
Hi, my name is Lynn, and I want to give my testimonial for DBT Path at emotionalsensitive.com. I want to talk about two things that I think are important, and one of that is that this is an active resource. And what I mean by that is that when as someone who's gone through so many types of therapy for so long with very little success, I was terrified. I was terrified to commit to a structured program because I didn't know what that meant. Did that mean I was only going to see the results at the end of that? And I didn't. I started seeing the results, I remember, from the second class, actually. And by halfway the first module, my life had drastically changed. And it has going to stay that way. So it's just really sweet to remember. And a big part of that is how active these courses are. You are set up to succeed in a way where you are actually learning to look at your maladaptive patterns and the things that are making your life difficult from the root, and you're giving you are given instructional steps to fix them. And I think that's really important because a lot of people rely on their therapy. And yeah, therapy is good, but also you should learn to trust yourself and to rely on yourself. That's part of healing, is knowing that you will go through hardships, but you won't make them worse for yourself. And the second thing I loved about this course is how much mindfulness it brings. And the reason I love that is because it felt so natural. And what I mean by that is not that it wasn't work, right? It's still work. You need to put in the effort, but because they set you up to look within and to look at life and emotions in a detached way, in a more calm way, in a more mindful way, you're able to be proactive as opposed to reactive as to how you go about your healing journey and improve it. So if you're considering DBT Path, I think you should give it a shot because the team is wonderful and it's going to help you a lot.
The passion.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that detail of, I thought it would help me by the end, but starting at the beginning. And I think that's true. It's like we try to make things, helpful right off the bat, not like give us 9 months. It's like, no, things are gonna, this is active.
It's so important.
Change.
And a lot of times when people come to DBT, like a lot of what these students are saying, and for me, when I joined a DBT skills group, it felt like the last hope, whether that was true or not, but I'd tried so many things, and to think it's going to take 9 months to feel better is like, it's almost like that emotion's going to last forever. So just knowing that there's going to be some relief, some sense of community, some sense of support off the bat. And throughout the experience and journey, not just like I have to do this and then wait 9 months to feel better. It's like really good points. And one more for us.
Hi, my name's Ellen. I live in London, England. I'm 44 years old, and I've been accessing DBT Path and the resources available through emotionallysensitive.com for about the past year. I've done all 3 of the modules at least once, and I have to say I found the experience life-changing. I wish I'd had the opportunity to find this information and find a resource like this many, many, many years ago. I think my life would have been completely different had I had the kind of knowledge that Debbie and Catherine provide much earlier. I've had various therapies, medications over the years. I was first diagnosed with BPD in my early 20s. But I think it's the fact that this is a peer-led course means that there are certain insights and certain knowledge that's provided and opportunities for different kinds of workshops that aren't part of a standard DBT package, at least not in the UK. And it's those that I think really make the difference with this course. I really, really highly recommend it. I think the opportunity to be in that peer environment that's completely non-judgmental, it is really helpful, and that the structure of midweek materials and self-care thread on the weekend means that it does create a framework that actually feels quite safe, because I know that, you know, if I'm in a bad time, then I do have those spaces to go to. And then that's backed up by really excellent presentation of information that I think everyone should have about how our own brains work, and techniques for managing life when you're emotionally sensitive. I couldn't speak more highly of it and thoroughly recommend it. Thank you.
So articulate, all of our students
Yeah.
are.
And just really highlighting the peer aspect, that this experience inside and out, and that is incredibly rare in any DBT setting. So I think that is well stated there, that really is a difference to the program.
Absolutely. So we hope you're all feeling inspired and encouraged and excited about coming to learn with us. You can actually go to emotionallysensitive.com right now and sign up. Registration is open for a limited time and classes starting very soon. We would love to have you with us.
Come join us.
Yes, we'll see you in class very soon. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.